episode, we are going to start doing some backend work. But before we get started, let us review what we sort of completed in the last episode. And it's this couple of components that allows us to be able to create a new group chat. And for example, this group chat partner picker screen, we have this new group screen that is going to allow us to be able to add a title to a group chat. There's a couple of things that I want us to complete here really quickly before we jump into the backend work. And if we bring up the simulator, the right simulator is the completed project. And as you can see, the participants count right here is not really matching the actual participants count. And also we have a black circle instead of a image that has a camera icon. So let's fix those two really quickly. And once we're done with that, we are going to jump right into fetching the user data, which is what we have here. So in the completed project, when you go to this new group section, as you can see, you have the actual backend fetching and getting the actual users that we have already created. And so we are going to be doing that functionality today. We're going to be creating a user service, and that's going to be a lot of fun. So let's jump right into Xcode and get this code started. And so like I said, let's replace this black circle with an actual image. And for us to do that, I am just going to create a function called, let's see, I'm going to come right down here and I'm going to create a function. So I'm going to create a private function as always, because we are good developers and we use access modifiers the right ways. So I'm going to create a profile image view, some view, and it's going to just be a button. And the reason it's going to be a button is because eventually we want this button to be able to, select profile images for us, basically the cover images that we want the group chat to have. And so the system name is going to be camera, and we're going to make the image scale large. What else do we want? We're going to make the foreground. Honestly, let's leave the foreground style as that for now. And let's take this profile image view. Let's add the frame that we added to the circle to the entire button or to the Z stack. Let's, make the background color our usual system gray 6. Oh, let's use 5 for now. Let's see what 5 looks like. Let's remove this frame. We no longer need that. As you can see, we have that functionality, or we have that appearance right now. And the last bit of the equation is let's just clip it. Let's give it a clip shape of circle. And let's see, what does camera the fill looks like? Does that look better? What do you guys think? And maybe make a system gray 6. I think that looks better. I don't know. That looks pretty good to me. The next thing I want us to do is this participant count. So let us fix that really quickly. And honestly, we already did something similar in the last episode. And the solution, if I recall, is inside of our group partner picker screen. And if we go all the way down here, this right here, this is the solution. So I'm just going to grab all of this. I'm going to grab that as well. And I'm going to go right back to the new group setup screen. And I'm going to paste it right here. And we're going to make a couple of changes really quickly. And the first thing I want us to make is, so we're going to have participants, and we're going to have the selected counts. So we're going to have the selected counts, and we are going to have a text that says of, and then we're going to have the maximum count. So it should look like, yep. So right now it says 0, which is exactly what we want. And for us to preview it, we need to go inside of our chat partner picker screen, which is the starting point of the channel creation flow. And so if we go new group, we go OSAS, we go Bob, we go next. As you can see, we have the correct counts right here. And if we remove one item, it says 1 of 12. And if we remove another, it says 0, and the create button is disabled. And so that's great. We have gotten the first step of the equation out of the way. The next step for us, honestly, is to handle this functionality that allows us to be able to fetch the users in our backend. And in the completed project right here, we have this list of users. Well, actually, this is not a completed project. Sorry about that, guys. This is the completed project. And so this adds the completed users in the backend. However, we are actually paginating the users, because one of my goals in this series is that, I want us to write code that is actually as close to production as possible. I don't just want us to write crappy code, and in real life, you would probably be paginating this amount of data. And what I'm referring to is, if we go into our Firebase project, if we go into the real-time database, and this user's path right here, I've gone ahead and created a couple of users. In this user's path, we have 3 users. Well, I have 3 users. You guys probably have 1 user, which was the QA user 1 that we created in the initial episode. Eventually, in a real-world production, this user's reference or this user's node is probably going to have anywhere from thousands to millions of potential users. And so it doesn't make sense for us to be fetching all of those users at once, because as you can imagine, that is very computationally expensive, and that's just an inefficient way to handle data. And so the concept behind pagination is just sort of like a book where you have pages. And so if we have pagination, imagine we have 300 items in this user's path. Let's say we fetch the first 3 items. So we do 1, 2, 3, and then when we get to that 3, which is when the user gets to the bottom of the screen, we paginate for more items from our backend. And in order for us to really see this in action, I believe we need to create a couple of more stub data. And I'm going to create a couple of test accounts really quickly. So please follow along. So the first thing I want us to do is to jump into our auth provider file. And if you remember, it's inside of our auth folder inside of our services, we have the auth provider file, which has the auth manager that conforms to the auth provider contract. And if we scroll all the way to the bottom, I have provided this new piece of stub data that I am calling test accounts. And what is test accounts? It's just a string of QA users. So I have QA user 1 all the way to QA user 50. So I have QA user test 1 all the way to QA user 50. And I'm going to provide this in the comments or in the source code. But if you guys wanted to follow along, you can also probably just pause this or try to like type this out. But honestly, I'm just going to copy this and paste it in the comment section of this video so you guys can just use this test account. So it's just a static property. It's an array of string on our authentication manager. The next thing I want us to do is to jump into our root screen model. If you remember, we have a root screen, which is under the root folder. Inside of the view models folder, we have this root screen model. And what I'm going to have us do is I'm going to have us create a bunch of test accounts in our actual backend. So that way we can actually paginate them. And so I've gone ahead and also written a very quick preview code for this episode. And so the first code that we have to take a look at is this register test account with email function. And it's just a function that actually uses the authentication manager to create an account. And if you remember, like we've said, our create account method inside of our auth manager just creates an account with Firebase create account method and then saves that account's information into our database. And then it sends out a publication using our combined publisher. But the main focus that we really want is we just want a situation where we can populate this users node with about 50 users and also populate this authentication console with about 50 users. That way we can actually paginate things. And so going back to the root screen model, really, we're just going to loop through that test account. So I'm going to say auth manager test accounts. Remember, it's a static property. And then for each email, and I'm just going to fire this register test account function. So pause the video and write this code out. And we're just going to call it inside of the init block of our root screen model. Remember, this init block gets fired only once. So we are good to go. And we're only going to run this run so we can have a bunch of stub or dummy accounts. And so I'm going to run the code now on the simulator. And once I'm done running the code, we should see this user's node populate with over 50 accounts. And so let's do that right now. So I'm going to run my simulator. Okay, that is done. And then I'm going to go to my Xcode. I'm going to go to my Firebase console. Look at that. Boom. We have over 50 test accounts now. And so if we go through each one, you see this is QA user 13, QA user 27. And if we go into our authentication console, look at that. Now we have over 50 accounts, Yep. So now we have over 50, Firebase accounts registered, and which is good. The next thing we want to do is let us stop our simulator and let us remove these piece of code because we do not want this to fire every single time we actually, load up our application. This is just a one-time operation. You can think of it as a database migration, I suppose, but we're just registering a bunch of test accounts so we can actually do pagination. So now, if we go back now, it says QA user 45 logged in. Let us log in with the last QA account. And if we go into auth provider file, the last QA account is QA user at test.50 at test.com. Sorry. I'm going to log out of this account really quickly and log into that QA user 50 to make sure everything is working. So QA user 50 at test.com. And the password is, if we go to our root screen model, the password was what? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So let's do just that. I'm going to close this other preview. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Login button. And look at that. If we look at our console, as you can see, successfully logged in QA user 50 at test.com, which is exactly what we want. All right, so now that we have that sort of operation out of the way, we've done our house cleaning. The next thing I want us to do is to actually create a user service. And so what is a user service? I'm going to remove this comment really quickly. And so I'm going to close out of some of the screens that I don't need right now. And a user service is essentially going to be responsible for, the API interaction with our Firebase backend. And so we could choose to do this inside of the view model, inside of our chat partner picker view model, but that's not really a good idea. It's always a good idea to introduce like another layer or another service layer that helps us abstract API interactions away from the view model. So that way our view models don't become super clunky. As you can see right now, our view model is pretty lean and it's very easy to reason about. So we're going to create a service folder inside of our project. So we'll go to WhatsApp clone. We're going to create a new group. We're going to call it service. And the first service that we need is to create a new file, Swift file. Again, not a SwiftUI file, a Swift file. And the first thing we need to do is create a file called user service. Okay, so what is user service? Well, we're just going to first and foremost create a struct. It's going to be a struct. So we're going to call it user service, right? And again, it's going to be responsible for the API interactions for the users node in our backend. And let's import the dependencies that we need. So we need our Firebase dependency. And then we need our Firebase, I think it's called Firebase database. Okay, and so the idea behind this is I would like for us to create a static method that helps us paginate for users. And I'm just going to say static func paginate users. Okay. And so what does paginate users take in? Well, it's going to take in two things, actually. The first thing is it's going to take in a cursor, which is a string, and it's going to take in a page size, which is a UI int, an unassigned integer. Okay. And it's going to be an asynchronous function that can throw errors. And I'll explain this really quickly. And so the idea behind a cursor is the idea behind pagination. As you can think, we could use the analogy of a book. When you're reading a book, the last page that you stopped at is, in this situation for us, what you would call a cursor. You can think of that last page as sort of like a marker. You mark that last page. And if we go to our Firebase console, we go to the real-time database console, you can think of it this way. When we're paginating, we start with this first item. Let's say we start with this first item. We go all the way, we say, give me the first 10 items. So we go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, right? This number 10 is going to be our last cursor. So we're going to start at this, right? And then when the user is scrolling, so if we open our actual completed project, when the user is scrolling, when they get all the way to the bottom, if there's actually more data in the back end, then we're going to continue from number 10. We're going to say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, right? And then we're going to stop at 10. If they scroll to the bottom again, we're going to give them 10 more items. And so by doing that, we reduce the amount of data that, we are consuming, and we make sure we are batching our read operations, which is a very efficient thing that every large-scale application does when you're consuming large amounts of data. And so this last cursor is just a way for us to know where to start our next pagination. You can think of it as the last page or the last item. And so for us to do this, we need two things. Well, first off, we need to be able to know if we're the pagination. So when we're initially fetching the users, we're not going to have a last cursor, because if you can think of it, when we're fetching the first item, there is no last cursor because we haven't fetched an item initially. In the initial fetch, there's just no cursor. But when you get to the number 10 here, then this becomes the cursor. And so what we're going to do is we're going to make sure this last cursor is nilable. And we're going to say if last cursor is equals to nil, meaning this is the first time we're asking for this data, then we're going to do the initial data fetch. So I'm going to say initial data fetch. Else, if last cursor is not equals to nil, that means we're paginating for more data. So we're going to say paginate for more data. And so let's go ahead and write out this Firebase logic that is going to help us do this. And what we're going to do is we're going to create a couple of snapshots. So we're going to say main snapshots is equals to try await Firebase constants. Remember our Firebase constant that we created a couple of episodes ago? This user reference, which is just referring to this reference in our backend. Okay, that's just a Firebase syntax for that. We're going to say Firebase constants, user ref. We're going to say query limited to last, and then we're going to say page size. Okay, remember what I said earlier about we're doing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So the page size is the number of items that we want to fetch by each pagination. So it's like, how many pages do you want to read? Essentially, that's the way to think of it in layman's terms. And so we're query limited to this page size. And then we're going to say get data. And the get data, if you can read the method, it says this method is used to get the most up-to-date data from this query. Well, pretty much what it does. So we're going to get data. You can throw an error, but let's first handle a couple of things first. The first thing we want to do is we want to get the first item. Okay, so we're going to say first is equals to main snapshot dot children dot all objects dot first, and this all object is of type data snapshot. So there's a concept of a data snapshot right there. And you can read up on a lot of these things with Firebase documentation if you're not familiar with Firebase. And then we're also going to create something for the all objects. We're going to say all objects is main snapshot children again all objects, and this is just an array of data snapshots. So I'm going to say array of data snapshots. Else I'm going to return, I need to return something here. So let's just return nil here. But the thing is, I don't want this to just return nil. I want this to be able to return what I'm going to call, essentially we want it to return an array of user items, right? Because when we're done paginating, when we're done grabbing each of this item, they actually contain the user item that we want. And in order for us to do that, I would like to introduce a sort of like a neater abstraction that allows us to handle this pagination very well. And so I'll create another structure called user node. A user node is going to have two properties. It's going to have the array of users, and it's going to have the current cursor or last cursor, whichever one you want to call it. And again, remember, last cursor is just a way for us to track where we are at in our pagination. So to reiterate again, if we paginate for 10 items, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, if we stop here, this is our last cursor or our current cursor, whatever you want to call it, right? If we paginate again, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, let's say this is the 10th item, this is the new cursor. And so we're storing that in some sort of a structure. You can think of this as a container. And I would like for us to create a static property on this user node, and I'm going to call it empty node. So what is an empty node? Well, an empty node is just a node that has, again, no value. So the user's property is going to be an empty array, and the current cursor is just going to be nil. Okay? So the return property here, instead of return an array of user item, I'm going to return a user node. So this is a very clean way for us to sort of wrap this. And now, instead of returning nil here, I'm going to return empty node, because for whatever reason, if any of these snapshots don't have values, then that means we do not have any data inside of this user's path. Okay, so if we continue with our logic, the next thing we need to do is compact map this. We need to create some sort of a map that helps us convert this object into an actual user item. And the way for us to do that is this. So I'm going to say all objects, compact map. Okay, the compact map is going to have, I'm going to call it user snapshot. And by user snapshot, I'm referring to each one of this. So when you expand each one of this path, each one of this node, this is the user snapshots, the email, the UID, the username, which is just the key value pairs of string and any. Okay, so the user snapshots, it's going to be in. And what else? We need to create a user dictionary now. So I'm going to say user dictionary is equals to this user snapshot, which has a value property. And I know the values are going to be a dictionary of string and any. And if that's not the case, I'm just going to, return an empty dictionary. And what I'm really doing here, when we say user snapshot of value, again, we're referring to this. When you expand each one of these paths, if you think about it, it's just a dictionary. The key is called email. The value is the value of the email. UID, the value is the value. Username, and vice versa. And so that's what we're trying to map here using our Swift syntax. So then I'm going to return user item. Remember, our user item takes in a dictionary. We're just going to pass in this user dictionary right there. Okay. What else do we need? Well, I would like for us to now say if the users, I would like for us to create, let's see. Yeah, if the users count is equals to the main snapshot, the children count. So this main snapshot has a children count property. Then I'm going to, return this user node. So I'm going to create a new node. I'm going to say user node is equals to, and user node just takes in an array and a last cursor. So it's going to be an array of these users that we just created here using compact map. And the last cursor is going to be, or the current cursor is going to be first.key, this first object right here. Okay. Then all we need to do is return a user node. So this is going to yell at us, and all we're going to do is let's just return an empty node here. If for any reason it gets to this point, then that means none of these actually contain a value. If not, it's going to return the user node right here. And then we're also going to return an empty node here for now. We'll handle the pagination later. So this is the initial data fetch, the initial data pool. And the way we're just going to use this user service is we're going to go inside of our chat partner, pick a view model. Let me expand Xcode all the way. And we're going to create a new function that is going to be responsible for fetching user data. And right here, I'm just going to create a function underneath, above the selections. I'm going to say func fetch users. And, let's make that a synchronous function. And what does fetch users do? Well, first and foremost, remember our user service is going to be throwing error because of this throw syntax right here. So the first thing we need to do is to be able to catch that error. So I'm going to print, I'm going to say failed to fetch users in chat partner pick a view model. And as always, I like to add an emoji because it just makes it easier to be able to filter for these things later. And the emoji that I'm looking for, where's my emoji? Is disk. I'll use a disk emoji. Come on. There we go. All right. So in the do block, all we need to do now is to, say try await because it's async and it can throw an error. And we're going to say user service dot paginate users with last cursor. So what's going to be this last cursor? Well, let's create a private property here that can hold on to our last cursor for us. So I'll say last cursor is just going to be a string, an optional string. And remember, again, last cursor in this situation is just each one of these UIDs, the keys, because we have a user's path and it contains a bunch of key value pairs. And these keys are going to be the cursor. So the first key is going to be 1MCYZ. All right, so we're going to pass in this last cursor. And the page size, let's give it something like 5, just so we can see what we're working with. So try await. And then what I'm going to do next is I am going to capture this inside of a variable. So I'm going to say user node is equals to that. Okay. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to say self dot. All right, let's think for a second here, guys. So we need a new property that actually contains our users. So I'm going to create a new publish property right below the selected chat partners. And this users is just going to represent this array here. In the completed project, as you can see, we have an actual users that we're fetching from the backend. And so we need an array to be able to hold this specific data. This is separate from the selected chat partners array. And so we're going to create another publish property. We're going to call it users and let's make it privately set. So I'll call it private set because there's no reason for you to be changing this outside of this class. And it's just going to be an array of user item. All right, so we have our users. Then I can now say self.users is equals to what? Well, it's going to be equals to the user node dot users because remember that contains a user property. All right, so we are almost done. We need to, however, store the last cursor. So we're going to say the last cursor is equals to user node dot current cursor. Okay. And that's pretty much it. So the next thing we need to do is fetch this. Well, that's not it. That's it for the initial data pool. So we need to create an init block for our chat partner pick a view model. And that init block is going to, fire this fetch users function upon initialization. And so once we fetch this function, the next thing we need to do now is go inside of our screens folder. Let's go inside of our chat partner pick a screen. We're going to open in a new tab. And now, instead of using this, dummy array, we're actually going to use view model dot users. And this is going to contain a user. And now I'm going to pass in that user to our chat partner row view. Okay. We need to do the same thing for our group partner pick a screen. So I'm going to open this up. And inside of our group partner pick a screen, I believe we're using the stop data as well. We're using user item, the placeholders. So I'm going to replace that as well with view model .users, right? And so let's run our project on the simulator, make sure it's fetching the right amount of data. And in this case, it should just be fetching 5 items. And so if we go to the channel tab, create a new channel, look at that. We have 5 items. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And we can confirm this by printing the last cursor just to make sure we're doing the right thing. So let me put a print statement here, last cursor. I'm going to run the project again. And Xcode is yelling at us that we're publishing from a background thread. And the quickest way to fix that is just to mark this with a main actor. We're not really doing anything crazy in this view model, so I wouldn't worry about, that. Let's just mark it with a main actor. So we can jump to the main thread. And so if we go back and replicate the process again, look at this. It says our last cursor is VENTK. So let's take this, let's jump to our Xcode, our Firebase project, and let's search for that. What is that? So this is VENTK. Also, sorry guys, I was getting it wrong. It's actually reading from the bottom. So if we're doing 5, if we're asking for 5 users, that means we do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, which makes sense, right? And so that means the next cursor is going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So the next cursor should be RFF, okay? And let's go and handle the pagination section now. So we know we're doing the initial data fetch, right? The next thing for us to do is to handle the actual pagination logic. And for us to do that, let's remove this empty node and let's, think about what we need in order to make that happen. Well, we need to create a snapshot again. So I'm just going to grab, actually, no, let's just write it out. Main snapshot, excuse me. Try await, Firebase constants, user reference. And this time around, we are going to do a little bit of query mapping. Well, we're going to add a little more queries to this. So we're going to say query ordered by key. And then we're going to say query limited to. So the 2, what are we going to limit it to? Well, we're going to limit it to the last cursor because remember, if we're fetching from the bottom, if we do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, we're going to do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 up to here. So we're going to say query limited to last 5. Okay. Well, not last 5. Sorry, guys. Let's think here. Well, limited to the last page size plus 1. And I'll explain that in a second. And wait, nope. Scratch that, guys. I meant to say query limited to the last cursor. And then we are going to apply a query limited to last, query limited to value, add value. Gee, I am all over the place right now. I am capping. Sorry about that, guys. Let's say it should be query ending at last cursor, query limited to page size plus 1, and then we're going to get the data. All right. So we're almost done. The next thing we need to do now is to get the first and last and all of the objects. So I'm just going to copy this because it's essentially the same thing. And we're going to come back and refactor this. No worries. And so we have this. And what do we need to do? Well, we need to do the same data mapping. So I'm going to grab this, users mapping, paste it right here. And I'm going to do the same thing for the node counts. If users, the counts is equals to snapshot, the children counts, users node, the same thing again. And this time around, let's return an empty node. If for some reason we get to the bottom. We get to this bottom of this file and we still haven't returned actual data. And there's a couple of things that I want us to do here. Because we're adding 1 to this, there's going to be duplicates because it's going to also try to get the actual last cursor as well. So we need to filter out that duplicate. And the way for us to do that is to use the filter logic. So we're going to say filtered users just to remove duplicates, to remove the last cursor. And we're just going to say users.filter. And we're just going to say if the UID is not equals to this last cursor, okay, then you can go ahead and, get that specific user node. Okay, well, get that specific user item. Okay, so the next thing, we have the query set up. The next thing for us to do is to actually do the view side of the equation. And the way we're going to do that is to go into our chat partner, pick a screen, and we are going to need to add a couple of views, a couple of loading views to help us fire that pagination logic. All right, so let's create a function that will do just that. So I'm going to go right below, instead of our chat partner, pick a screen, right below here, and I'm going to just create a function called load more users. And load more users is just going to be a progress view. That's pretty much it. And I'm going to give it a max width so we can fill the entire list. And let's see, I'm going to remove the background. List row background is going to be colored clear. All right, let's resume our SwiftUI preview. Let's kill our simulator. Resume our preview. Come on. And we're going to take this load more views and we're going to put it right below our header, below this section. So load more users, let me call it load more users view because that's what that is. Load more users view. And as you can see this progress view that's spinning right there. And the easy way for us to fix this is we're going to attach an onAppear modifier to it. So we're going to say when this progress view appears, well, we want to create a task and just, actually, we don't even need to do an onAppear. We could just do a task. and we're just going to say await view model, and we're going to fetch more users. Okay, this is going to make sense in a little bit when we actually load up our project, because as you can see, the current project that we have on the simulator, if we go here, we're only seeing 1, 2, 3, 5 items. And as you can remember, we have over 50 items in our backend, over 50 users in our backend. And so what we really need to do now is let us run the project. Actually, before we run the project, let's go to our chat partner picker view model. So right now, this logic is actually flawed because we're just saying self.users is equals to the users user node.users, and we don't really want to do that. We want to append the contents. So what we're going to do is we're going to say self.users is append contents of user node.users. So it's always going to keep appending, and then we're going to run our function. We're going to run our project. We're going to go to our chats tab, open up the picker. We're going to go right. So as you can see, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Look at that. You see, it fetched more users and more users and more users and more users and more users until we get to the last section. All right, and we can honestly figure out a little bit. There's going to be some duplications right here because we don't have any logic that's preventing duplication from happening. And the other thing I would like for us to do is to keep this last cursor print statement up. And so let's go back to our chat partner picker view. Actually, before we go to our chat partner picker view, let us create some sort of a logic that lets us know if a view is even paginatable. So I'm going to create in this view model, I'm going to say is paginatable. Again, I like computer properties for things like this. And so I'm just going to say if the users is not empty, then it is paginatable, right? Because if this is empty, then what is there to paginate, right? So we're going to take this is paginatable computer property, go to our chat partner picker screen, and inside of here, what we're going to do now is we're not just going to put this load more users view inside of the list. We're going to put a conditional block. We're going to say if view model is paginatable, which is this computer property we just created, then and only then are we going to show that loading view and actually fire it and get it to fetch more users. And so let's run our project now. Let's see what happens. So it loads up. We go to our channel. We go to our group. As you can see, we are getting some last cursor indicators already. Let us fetch. Okay. So there's a little bit of a bug in here right now. And I believe the way for us to fix this, because this is yelling at us that the ID is occurring multiple times, and that means we're having duplications. And that is never good when that happens. And so let's go into our user service and let's see what is it that we're doing wrong. And yes, so we need to pass in the filtered users, not the users. So we forgot to use that property. So let's run that. And the reason the console was yelling at us is because it was also fetching the last cursor as well, which causes duplication. So if we go back here and if we scroll, you notice we're no longer getting that warning in the console. And that means there is no more duplication. And so it's saying the last item is YMCZ, and that is the last page on our users path. So if we go to our Firebase console and we take a look at our Firebase console, you can see the last item is actually YMCZ. And if we do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, the last one before that was 2VC or 2N. Well, it says it's 2NJB. So let's fetch that. And that is right here. Okay, so everything looks to be working great. Let's run the project again, make sure. And actually, before we run the project, I would like to put a print statement inside of our chat partner picker view model and just get the number of items that we are actually fetching. So I'm going to say users.count. And now I'm going to validate that with what we have in our backend to make sure we're fetching all of the items. And so we have 5 items, 10 items, 15 items, 20 items, 25, 30, 35, 40, 53 items. Okay, 53 items. And so if I go back to our Firebase console, I go to our authentication. If I scroll all the way to the bottom, as you can see in my console, I have 53 accounts, which is correct. And as you can see, we just handled pagination for this chat partner picker screen. We can do the same logic for our group chat partner picker screen as well, which is the screen right here. Right? It makes sense for us to also handle pagination for the screen as well. And it's going to be very easy. All we got to do is go back to our chat partner picker screen, copy this code right here, take it right back to our group partner picker screen. Right below this section, we're going to paste it. Right? It's going to yell at us that there's no function called load more users view. We're going to copy this function. We're going to go right back to our group partner picker screen. We're going to paste that function right down here. Okay? All right. And what I'm trying to do right now is make sure that when we're also in the screen, that we're also paginating for users. So when we go to here, inside of this chat partner picker screen, we know we are paginating, which is good. But when we go to this screen, for example, this new group, we want to make sure we're also paginating in the screen. And right now we're not currently paginating, but once we run the project, that should be fixed. And I believe that is going to be it for this episode. I know that was a lot of stuff, but it takes time to write things that actually works and scales and that we can actually use in production. And as you can see, we're actually paginating and it works really, really well. And so let's select item and let's see what it looks like. When we select our items, they actually populate like the way they should, which is good. When we go back to the other one, everything is good as expected. If we do new group, those items are still selected and we can deselect them if we wanted. And so that's going to be it for this episode. In the next episode, let's get started with actually creating group chats and direct messages. And so I hope you guys are having fun. Please leave a like and subscribe. It means a lot to me. I'll see you guys in the next one.